did tell us you wanted Tim Lomar and the collector to go first.
They're not here.
Okay, they're not here, so we'll go first. Okay.
That Lomar, he works on his own clock. You know, what are you going to do?
Dan Peen, you want to join us? Because I think you're
Come on down.
first. Can they?
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, I sit there?
All
Very
pumped to be at
important,
the,
yes.
all pumped to be at the
Make
podium.
yourself comfortable.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want anybody to be too tough on Dan, because he's a Michigan fan and he's
It was a very bad weekend.
Hey, as a Razorback fan, I'm right there with you.
But
At least you won more than 2
You're
football
used to
games.
it.
That's right. No, so I was good with you right till then, Dan. So let's talk about cuts we can make and corrections. So,
So if we can go ahead and put the first here.
Call it the PowerPoint.
Okay. So the only thing going up on the board is this PowerPoint that we sent down to the council on Wednesday last week. So, you know, when we hired Dan, one of the things we asked him to do was to really go and take a strong look at corrections. As you know, when Mr. Crawford joined us, he had a big leap to make. I think at that point in time, we were running corrections on a fairly narrow path. And one of the things that Director Crawford really did for us was to bring electronics to some of the things that were very manpower intensive. And he did a very good job at that. But we knew when we started looking at how badly the building was aging, which was obviously not Larry's fault. I mean, it's a building in use 24/7, 365 by 500 people on average, not all of whom respect the building at all times. We knew we had a lot of issues there. We built that building during a very narrow time in corrections in the United States where indirect supervision was popular, which actually causes a need for more manpower. And we learned more about that while Corey led the master plan review that we did. And we wanted to give Dan some time. So we completed the redo of the medical suite, and then we had talked to Larry about, we thought we had a hold until we could take more look at it. So with that in mind, I don't want to cut Dan off in any way, and I'll ask him to talk about his assessment, but as a setting, the thing you have to remember is sort of this opening statement that he and I worked on for this last week, which is you have to remember in this jail, you have the entire spectrum of individuals. You have some people who are going to go to prison for life for a very long time at the state after their conviction. They're there pre-trial. You have people who have already been convicted and are federal prisoners, and you have a lot of people who got there because something's gone wrong in their life, and they're going to go back into the community. And, you know, it could be somebody who's, you know, faced a series of bad decisions and they're fairly a hardened criminal, or it could be your next door neighbor's kid who got hurt in high school sports and started stealing some drugs and ended up stealing more than that and now is having to do some time in the jail, but who we want to get back into connected to services in the community so that they won't reoffend. And as Dan looked at his statistics, 95% of the population that moves through there re-enter the community. So I will let you go from there.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Good evening, council. Yeah, just like Joanne said, you know, what comes through the facility, you know, we have low offenders, medium offenders, and high offenders. Every state inmate that goes to the state correctional facility goes through a county jail. Okay, so we have a mixture of individuals that, you know, may have a 24-hour hold, but then we might have a group of individuals that are in for murder, manslaughter, what have you. So we have to be able to fulfill the needs from the very bare minimum all the way up to the maximum security inmate. And it's correct that 95% of these individuals are going to come home someday. They may be your neighbors, they may be your friends, a loved one. So part of this assessment that I went through the first 6 months is recognizing that we don't provide any programming for our inmate population. We don't do anything on our end to make sure they're better when they return back to society from when they came in. So that's part of this assessment that I'm going to point out here briefly, and then move through the rest of the assessment. Now, for the 6-month assessment, this past Friday was my 6-month probation anniversary, so I made that one. But this assessment is just a snapshot of the correctional facility. You know, one of the things I recognized coming on board, our first-line supervisors are currently staffed with inmate duties. They cannot officially act as supervisors to enforce the rules of the jail and respond to issues that emerge. Because our shift supervisors, the sergeants and corporals, are part of the minimum staffing. So on first shift, I need 26 officers to run that shift. Well, 2 of those is a sergeant and corporal. With that said, there's almost on a daily basis, I have my corporal can't be a shift supervisor because they're overseeing the medical department, or they're overseeing the hallway movement of the inmate, going back and forth from one location to another. And then the sergeant then is in a position to where they're fielding the phone calls, trying to fill holes that are in the schedule because of shortage of staff, either by calling in sick, family emergencies, PTO, etc.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Do you want us to ask questions while he's talking, or do you want us to
Sure.
finish? Okay. Sure. When you said overseeing the medical department, how much supervision does that take?
Depends how many individuals are going down there. I mean, for instance, there's times we might only have 1 or 2 inmates that go down there. I need 1 officer down there. But there might be other times where I have 20-some inmates going there.
Are there times where there most often where you don't have any inmates in there?
Yeah, when there's times that there's no inmates down there, that officer can be pulled back.
So you'll have the numbers on how many people are serviced in the medical center?
On a daily basis, I mean, it's a fluid number. I mean, it roughly goes back and forth. But once that individual's not down there, then when we start doing medication pass, then that's where the corporal then follow the nurse to go around to all the housing units to do med pass. Parts of the corporal jobs, like I said before, is filling unscheduled call-offs for illnesses, family emergencies. So that can be a daunting task because if you're trying to cover an 8-hour shift, you're trying to find somebody to cover the first 4 hours of that shift, and then you're calling the officers that are already off to cover the back 4 hours of that shift to make sure that we're covering all the shifts. And then also in this assessment, we don't have any, like I said earlier, we don't have any programs for the inmate population. You know, we have on average 500 inmates in our facility, and we do not provide them anything. Corrections has changed. That's the one thing to pinpoint on. Corrections has changed over the years. I mean, back in the day, you should be punishment is medicine. Then lock them up and throw away the key. Now we're in that rehabilitative reentry part of corrections. We have to do our part to make sure that we're getting the individuals the tools that they need to go back into society better than what they were. And currently, we're not doing that. So for the corrections caseworkers, we currently have 2 caseworkers that currently serve 500 plus inmates. They handle inmate grievances and request slips. In 2019, the recommendation is to add 1 more correctional caseworker to focus on inmate assessments, and this will provide programming, after release services to try to prevent recidivism rate. Okay. Increase access to GED, life skills, religious services, AA and NA for these individuals. And then also to do a risk needs assessment. They would provide a risk needs assessment for individuals coming into our facility, so we know if they are high on the recidivism rate, if they were released, what programming they need to go that they scored high in. And also is a tool for the judges to use as bail recommendations. And then for the correctional supervision. Currently, we have 16 supervisors on the secure side of the facility, dealing with 21 shifts of correctional officers, overseeing 506 inmates. This staff consists of 1 lieutenant, 4 sergeants, and 11 corporals. 1 sergeant works on the administrative side. To increase a better, efficient overall view of our staff, we're looking at adding 5 more lieutenants to the facility and 1 more sergeant to the facility. In this way, this will provide the ability for the lieutenants and sergeants to be able to get out and observe what the inmate population is doing, to get out and observe to make sure the officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, following policy and procedures, and they're enforcing the rules and regulations of the facility. At this time, we can't do that. At this time, when we have a corporal tied down with either in the medical unit working or following the medical cart around the entire facility doing medication, and then the sergeant is tied down inside trying to fill slots or dealing with phone calls or incident reports of a fight that just occurred. We don't have the staff to go out and make sure the rest of the facility is running the appropriate way. There's no oversight to make sure the officers are enforcing the rules and regulations of the facility. So at this request, I am requesting 5 lieutenants, 1 more sergeant, which would give us a total of 6 sergeants. And by doing so, this would provide us adequate coverage of shift supervisors on all 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365.
Any questions?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Leanne or Joanne or whoever. So you got 16, how many total people do you have on a daily super, how many people? You got 16 supervisors, how many just corporals or whatever you call them?
On first shift, we have a total of 26 staff members assigned.
Total 26 including?
26, including shift supervisors.
So what is, from a national average, what, like, I don't know what association, correctional institute, whatever the heck the institute would be, but what's the national average for managing that many prisoners?
Well, I can tell you the facility I came from, when we were running around 900 to 1,000 inmates, we had 12 lieutenants on shift that covered every shift.
Jerry, do you know what those numbers would be? Like when you talk about population
We
with?
do, and actually, I don't have that with me, but Captain Vaughn ran that analysis, and we're way under that for the American Correctional Association numbers that they recommend. And so I've, just like with every other department that comes in with, well, the recommendation is if you have this much population, you should have this much people. We tell them to put that aside and justify to us what it is that they need. So those numbers are like 3 or 4 times this, but I'll get them to you first thing in the morning because we have those.
Do we have a liability or risk from not having enough? I mean, to me, I don't know anything about corrections. I really don't. Thank goodness I was never in the system.
I wasn't St. Peter's.
I know. But, in all seriousness, it doesn't sound like that. Like the ratios are where they're supposed to be, or what they could be by the standards. So, if something, if something really bad goes down, like a riot or anything of that nature, do we have a liability here that we don't have enough officers for the 506 inmates that are there at any given time?
Potentially.
You don't want to answer that question.
Well, yeah, I think we do, because
Well, not here.
Let me answer it this way, if I could. So there are,
I asked the question because I already know what the answer is, Joe.
Well, yeah, but still, with stuff that's going on.
there are national standards that we're way below the staffing. One of the things that we're trying to bring together before we figure out what additional we know we need the supervision change. We know we need that. You've got to have somebody in charge. Every instance that Dan has found over the last 6 months that he's called me about, whether in the middle of the night or during the day, that he's had a problem, it's because he doesn't have upper level supervision on the premises at the time directing what should happen. You know, there's only so far somebody who's barely moved out of being the general officer on the unit is going to feel like they're comfortable to go if something's going on before they pick up the phone. But they don't want to pick up the phone in the middle of the night sometimes until it's gone too far. So, you know, we've got that standard. The other piece of it is that Dan is extremely concerned about the fact that these bubbles that are inside each unit that the staff stay in don't allow them any reading of what's actually going on in the unit. They don't have a feel of how the unit is, if the inmates are upset or if something's going on. And so this assessment that we're going to be doing this year is to figure out if we can take down those walls effectively to create 64-bed units where the staffing would then tell us what we need. And that's a very different staffing that we need. It's actually less than if we just staff up in these bubbles inside the units where we're just watching the inmates through the glass. So that we're trying to take a step at a time in the right direction, and he knows he needs the supervision. He knows that he's got to have people in charge running the place every shift, 7 days a week. And once he's got that, that allows us to get through the feasibility study this year to see what walls we can take down and how many direct supervision units we can go to when we do that renovation that you saw us do the master plan for.
How's our turnover rate for the officers?
It's not that bad, actually. I mean, I can tell you when I came on board, we were 15 officers short, and within a week we grew to 21 officers short. During this last 6 months, we worked very hard to get individuals in place. We've gone to job fairs and got everybody signed up the best we can. And I know right now, I believe we have 6 openings right now. So our retention, we're holding on to individuals a little bit longer. We're spending more time from an administrative standpoint. We're making sure myself, the captains, assistant directors, we're out and about talking amongst the staff, making sure that, you know, they feel, you know, you're part of the family. And it's really from what I see, it's changed from what was previously to where we're at now.
Do you have a question?
I had the luxury of reading this earlier because Donna sent it out in a PDF, okay? And I want to compliment you. My 8 years of doing this, this is the best thing I've seen from the director of the county come through. I mean, I really enjoyed it, reading it, because it taught me something, okay? And a lot of the information we get doesn't teach anything, but I learned a little bit by reading it, so you did a good job on it. And when I compared this back to the budget, proposed budget, we're going from 172 to 178 personnel, which is a gain of 6. And the way our population's going, that's a small percentage. So I'm perfectly good with that. I see the budget's going up, but everything's going up. So, I mean, the budget's going up a little bit north of 10%. But then again, if your efforts work out and these people learn their lesson, go out of there and don't come back, that's going to be a long-term savings to taxpayers, as it's a lot cheaper to get them back and being productive citizens than it is to keep them locked up. So I just want to compliment you. I thought you did a hell of a job on this, and I would say that this ought to be a template for some of the other departments, because it was really informational reading it, and I'm good with it all. I mean, I had the time to look through it all, and I think you did a great job on it, okay?
Well enough.
I got a question.
sorry, Joe.
Dan or Joanne, when you said on your beginning that you got hardened criminals with regular, you know, teenager or some kid that gets hooked up for DWI or whatever, are you breaking that apart now? Are you gonna, is it gonna be in one? I don't know how it is. You got a big holding cell?
We tried to do an objective classification. You know,
When you say
unfortunately,
you're trying to, or you are doing that?
we're trying to because the facility, the way it's made up, hamstrings us in certain ways, okay? So we tried to place individuals the best we can per their charges in maximum housing units, medium housing units, so forth. There are times that there's individuals that cross over from, they should be a max, but we're out of room, we don't have the spacing, he has to keep separates. because he's a co-defendant for 2 or 3 other guys, we have to put him into a medium housing unit. That does happen. And to be really have an objective classification that we're not doing currently, but we're moving towards through 2019 is, right now we just look at the charges. We look at the charges for the last 10 years. But we also have to look at not only their current charges, their previous charges, but what's their physical build? Where are they at mentally? I mean, right now we have 43% of our inmate population is on psychotropic medication. So that plays a big factor in where we're going to place these individuals. Yeah, he might have a low charge, but he might be, you know, a concern mentally to where we have to put him in a different housing unit to make sure that he doesn't do any harm to himself or others. Same thing, if you have an individual who is 6'3" and a thin 330, like myself, but I'm in here for, say, a DUI, just my physical build would push me into a maximum or medium facility or housing unit because, you know, I wouldn't be in a non-violent offender program because of my stature. Just like if a 94-year-old man came in here that's frail and has murder charges, am I going to put him on the maximum unit or the federal housing unit? I can't do that. So there's a lot of variables at play in where we house people. And right now, with our population up, we are in positions where we have challenging times to try to find the right classification for these individuals or the right housing for these individuals.
Is that remodel going to take care of that, Joanne?
We hope so. We're hoping we can tear down some walls and open these units up so we're on direct supervision, and we can also do the special needs populations. I mean, he's getting people who are on CPAP machines that, you know, that's how they stay alive at night because they have sleep apnea, or people with mental, I mean, we have a suicide unit, but he's getting people with mental illness. He's getting a fairly large group of people coming in drug addicted. You know, it's a different group. I mean, it's not just bad check writers that you're trying to, you know, get to balance the fact that, hey, you go to jail for that, and do you really want to ruin your life in that way? He's getting people who are a different reason why they're coming to jail.
Okay, we need to kind of move along here. Next, I'd like to go ahead and have Michelle McBride talk to us. She was
Is that budget though presented as is it presented in here with his request in here?
It is.
Okay.
And the only other thing I just mentioned real quickly is you'll also see as medical costs are going up. It's because we lost our current provider. Low bid was more, not as much as the other bidding company, but you know, that's the #1 problem he's got next. Beside that is trying to keep nurses. We hire them, and we have a short-term staffing agency and a long-term staffing agency, and there are still times that the head of medical is staffing shifts herself, as is her assistant.
Well, then we need to pay him more, I guess, right?
We're trying.
Yeah.
Can I ask one quick question? What's the difference between a correctional officer and a correctional peace officer?
One's a commissioned officer. He goes through the police academy as certified police officer.
Very
And,
well.
and they're the ones that leave the facilities with the inmates during the day to go to like medical, take them to court, down at the federal courthouse, or those types of things.
Hospital duty. Yep.
Are we going to get any funding from that law? I mean, I guess we don't know, but with the jail increase, would that be some of the benefits we'd get from that lawsuit?
You mean the opioid one?
Yeah.
We're hopeful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Michelle, you want to come on up?
Okay.
33.
Okay.
33.
Thank you for allowing me to come to address you tonight. Because of the different budget discussions we had last year, I just want to start off with the budget process timeline. I don't know if you've heard this yet, but back on August 10th, we got the memo requesting our submissions to the budget. On September 11th, the elected officials received an email asking if we wanted to meet with the Finance Department. On September 25th, I sent an email to the Finance Department stating that if any of the figures were going to be changed, I would appreciate meeting. No meeting was scheduled. On October 16th, an announcement was made at the Directors Elected Officials meeting that the amount of the cost allocation for the Central Services Department would be given to those who are affected by that budget line item prior to the budget going to council. To date, I've not received that detail. November 9th, an announcement was made at the next month's Director Elected Officials meeting that the proposed budget was given to the council on Monday, which is fine, I guess, that you got it before we all got to review any changes that were made. However, on the date of that announcement, I printed off the collector's proposed budget from the public internet where everybody else got to already see it. And then 10 days later, I graciously received an invitation to come speak with you tonight, and I appreciate that because there were some differences discovered. In the general revenue budget before you, I submitted, the revenues that I submitted as an estimate for 2019 were increased.
What page are you on?
35
or 34?
Starts at 33, and where she's at is probably 34.
Mine is, well, yeah, where I'm reading, 32 is where it starts, but 34 is where the change actually is. So on the revenues, collector fees, and commissions, I submitted 6.8 million as my estimate, and it was increased to 7.5 million. The way I come up with those estimates is I look at the actual to date from 2018, I look at the missing months from 2017, I look at the growth percentage between 17 and 18, and try and come up with a very realistic revenue estimate, because the last thing you want to do is overestimate revenue and underestimate expenses. So I just call that to your attention. If that was needed to facilitate budgeting the employee raises, I don't know, I'm not sure because I was never given that meeting, but a $700,000 increase in revenue is a little bit significant in my opinion.
I have a question for you about that one. Estimate for this year is 7.5 million. 17 actual is 7.5 million. Why would you be at 6.8? Okay, what caused you to downgrade at 700,000?
Because we've lost several, well, I shouldn't say we've lost, several special assessments have come to their lifetime. So I took actual numbers and used them as the best estimate with a growth figure in them. So it's possible, but I don't know that I'd be going 700, maybe I'd go to 7 million again. It's hard to determine because it all depends on what the charges come in at. If rates increase, if values increase, well, the rates theoretically should roll back.
How accurate have your estimates been in the past?
I thought they were fairly accurate.
I guess what I'm driving at, we were 7.5 million in 17, 7.5 million in 18. I would assume that we'd be at 7.5 million again for next year, unless there's some reason that you think that we're down, going to be $700,000 less.
Well, you were just saying, what is
What's changing?
There are several special assessments that have, their lifetime has completed,
okay.
and we get commissions off of that also. If that's what wants to be left in there and I'm not in trouble, which theoretically there is no penalty for not coming in budget for revenues or I guess expenses either. But last year you made the comment, or someone on the council made the comment about accountability for the budget. So I am just explaining that this is one of the differences that was made without any communication.
Bob, can I ask you why you put in 7.5? I mean, is there any mathematical reason or?
Historic trend. There's no reason to expect that tax revenues are going to decrease in this market.
What about the commissions she's speaking of? Are you aware?
Commissions are a fixed percentage of those collections that come through Michelle's office. And we, as Joe's pointed out, we're looking at the same trend in 2018 that we had in 2017. 2018 is not an assessment year. And typically, in the even-numbered years, numbers will track very closely to what they were in the previous odd-numbered year when reassessment took place. Reassessment takes place in 2019 again, and all indications are that assessments are going to be up and revenues will be up in 2019. So I think by us being at $7.5 million in 2018, and then again, forecasting $7.5 million in 2019 is overall a conservative approach, because I expect revenues to go up in 2019.
So historically, your estimates have been accurate?
Yeah.
You said something about special assessments that are sunsetting, or I'm sorry, I didn't.
They live their life. Like you have a mid-district that may survive for 15 to 20 years, and then they paid off their bonds, or community
Right.
improvement district. So some of those are retired, would be, I guess, the best way to determine
Sure.
it. I don't really have an issue with the $700K. The bigger issue is the lack of communication that we had talked about. The tax maintenance fund budget, there are a few other items that are greater concern, and that one is on pages.
Michelle, could I just point out, the spend that you request is all as it was, except for some increased numbers that we have in your permanent full-time that just has to do with the application of the percentage increase to the budget over what you asked for.
Most items are flat. There have been a couple increases, very minimal, 4,000. So where the other 700,000 has been budgeted, I'm believing has to be in the personnel, and if that's where it's going, that's fantastic. I think we have very hardworking, dedicated county employees, and I have no problem if that's where $600-some-odd-thousand is going.
Well, how come you guys don't get the elected officials the budget a little bit sooner so they can review it if they're elected? Don't you think they should have it so they can review it?
They submit their budget, and they're invited to a meeting if they want one, and we schedule it if they request one.
Did you request a meeting?
I said if any of the numbers that I was submitting were going to be changed, I wanted a meeting. I don't know what numbers they're changing.
By looking at this, that basically what was requested was $1,125,000, and the executive is recommending $1,144,000. So they're actually recommending about $18,000 more than what was requested. So,
That is if you include the personnel, which is
Yep.
not, when it comes to the budget, according to the state statutes, the personnel budget should not be included in the operating budget when you're looking at the collector's budget.
even on the operating budget, they actually, what you requested and what the executive recommended are identical numbers. So they gave you
Correct.
everything you requested for operating and a little bit of a bump on personnel. Which-
Correct, and I said I do not have that issue. My issue is not necessarily with the general revenue budget, and this one was probably given a little more attention this year because the county auditor did his routine examination of the collector's office, started in May, finished with the collector in July, and is still waiting on the administration's response because for the 2 years prior to 2019, the collector's budget was cut in direct opposition of Section 52-317 RSMO. So the general revenue budget is not much of an issue. It's not an issue at all. And I believe that probably that routine examination and the county auditor's findings are a reason for that being the case this year. There are still some issues in the tax maintenance fund. And again, that goes to the imposition of the cost allocation, which the details were never shared. And that seems to be in conflict with 52-315.3, which states the collector has the sole responsibility for all expenditures made from the tax maintenance fund. It also seems to conflict with Section 49.510, which requires the county to provide and equip offices.
So what line is that? I mean, we're looking at a budget, so look.
You are looking at, or would be looking at page 215, the $52,503 cost allocation expense line. That was page 215. And it's a little bit lower than the center. Cost allocation recommended $52,503. That's an imposed expense.
So that's what we talked about last year a little bit, is that right?
It is.
Yeah, that, so that's what is, Bob explained this to me, I want to try to refresh my memory, that this is what the county administration or whoever, the accountant department, so to speak, charges back for services, is that correct?
Yeah, the cost allocation plan is a plan that takes the centralized departments of county government in the general fund and calculates a charge to the departments that are not in the general fund, this being one, for the services that those respective funds receive from the general fund, whether it be for HR, finance, county councilor, the centralized function departments in county government that are in the general fund. And that support is calculated through the cost allocation plan. It's identified, a number is identified based on allocation factors that are tailored pretty much to the type of fund that it is, the amount of support that it requires from information services or from finance or from HR, head count and number of devices, electronic devices that a function has. All of these factors go into what is ultimately the calculation. And as I mentioned in the previous meeting during the overview, we took a very hard look at the cost allocation plan this year. And after a lot of scrutiny by our budget team as well as our consultant, we feel like that we have a very representative and well-structured cost allocation plan for calculating these charges to these funds.
So what you're saying, Michelle, is if they give you $18,000 more on one end, they're actually costing you more, like over $30,000 on the other.
That and the fact that section 52.315.3 expressly states, all such expenditures from the tax maintenance fund shall not be used to substitute for or subsidize any allocation of general revenue for the operation of the office of the collector. If the tax maintenance fund did not exist, the collector's office would still need IS services, human resource services, and any of those other items that I've yet to see the breakdown for. Now, I have seen a breakdown for our computers, and I don't know if I lay this on here, if it's a regular piece of paper.
We'll show it.
It takes a moment to come up.
So I've been charged with 37 computers. And do I have 37 physical computers in my office space? I do. I have 13 full-time year-round staff members. Those 37 computers that sit idle for basically 9, 10 and a half months of the year, I'm sharing the same costs that are for the computers that are being used 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Doesn't quite seem appropriate. That and the fact that section 49.510 says the county is to provide and equip offices. So if the county is providing other offices with computers, other departments, then it is required by state statute to provide these things for the elected officials' offices. The purpose of the tax maintenance fund is to fund additional things. We have paid for check scanning software, and we continue to pay for that out of the tax maintenance fund. What this has done is anytime there's been a discrepancy between a taxpayer and what has gone through the bank, we can prove to them how they wrote their check. If they put the courtesy amount in numbers is in contradiction with the legal amount in words, we can show those taxpayers what their check looked like. We pay for the website to accommodate the Project Care donations. We pay for, trying to think of some of the other examples. We pay for the consolidation of online bill pay checks to service the taxpayers more efficiently and effectively. Those are all expenses that are additional and enhance the operations of the collector's office. Those are not things that are absolutely necessary, but they really help our citizens and our taxpayers and the county operations as a whole. So those are the types of additional expenses that the tax maintenance fund was designed for. That's the intent of the legislation. To provide for the bare necessities of an IS department or a human resource department, those have to be there no matter if a fund exists or not.
What was that, Art? What was that statute again?
49.510.
what would you use the collector tax maintenance fund for if that money didn't go to pay for the general expenses that Bob outlined?
If it's, could be new software. I mean, we could pay to revise the receipts. We could pay the $300 an hour programming expense to enhance some of the documents that go out to the citizens.
Why wouldn't you put that in your budget request then?
Because she never saw the budget.
Because those are minimal, those are enhancements. Those aren't the minimum required statutory receipt. But if we want to do something over and above the minimum statutory requirements, that's the goal of the tax maintenance fund, to have the money available without tapping into the general revenue. We actually decreased the revenue to the tax maintenance fund by almost $100,000 because the tax maintenance fund is funded by one of the 3% collected as a late payment penalty. So the better job we do collecting, the smaller that fund becomes. We put in programs like partial payments so taxpayers can make progress on their tax bills and pay less outstanding penalty and interest. Advance payments. We had a multitude, several hundred, well, close to 1,000 actually, tax bills paid in full before we even sent the data to the printer last week. A lot more have smaller balances because they've taken advantage of the advance payments. So the tax maintenance fund is not like sales tax, it's not like property tax. It's if people are paying late, it gets some money. So the better job we do collecting, the less money goes into that fund. The other thing that we pay for out of there is the assessor and I have contributed from our dedicated funds to cover the salary and benefits of an applications analyst in the IS department. Because we were told several years ago that the information systems department could not afford to have anyone work on our systems. So we voluntarily said, well, we need somebody dedicated, somebody who knows our system, somebody who knows the SQL Server and has access to it. So we pay for that person. Since that time, I believe there have been at least 3, maybe more, applications analysts added to the IS staff, paid for from the general revenue. So we do pay the general revenue fund some things from our budget, but when I'm told in October I'm going to see what this cost allocation figure is going to be, and then the next thing I know, the council's already got the budget, it's already out on the internet. The only thing I can do is come here and plead with you to again ask the administration and the finance department to please provide the information so that we can see it before everybody else sees it, and we can sit down and have friendly conversations instead of having to come here and say, here's the things that I found in the budget.
Joanne, are you guys going to have a conversation about
I want to read something.
if the computers is a negotiable, if in fact she's paying for 37 and she typically only uses 13 most of the time, is that a conversation worth having or what? I don't even know we charge for computers, but is some of this stuff worth looking at, or are you pretty convinced that where you're at is where you're at?
So back a number of years ago, before Harold retired, he looked at which of the funds we couldn't use, and the only 2 that he identified were not involved with this. So there's one in elections, and there's one of the 2 recorders funds that they told us we don't have access to. So that's what we've based all this on since then. It's been consistent since then.
It looks to me, this collector tax maintenance fund, the revenue coming in has been pretty consistent in the 360 to 380,000. Yet we're spending 500,000 plus. So we're actually spending more than what you're collecting, okay?
Right, because
So
we are
I'm
allowed to
sorry, but
reserve.
I can't speak about the lack of communication between your office. We're not in control about that. But just looking at the numbers, we're spending more as a county government for the operations of your office than what you're bringing in from the collector tax maintenance fund. If I'm
We
looking
are
at,
chipping away at our savings, is what we are doing, just as was done in the general revenue. Because by statute, we are allowed to have a certain amount in the tax revenue fund that rolls from year to year. And so we have been chipping away at that savings. So the next time we need to buy a computer system, it's going to have to come from the general revenue. Because the savings that this law says we are allowed to have, we have to chip away at in order to provide for the annual services. I am confused as to why the tax maintenance fund was not identified when Harold went through the funds, because 52.315.3 very clearly says it is not to subsidize.
I don't know, I haven't looked at it, so I don't know how you're interpreting it. And, I mean, these are all things, the budget comes in as a recommendation. Everybody's invited to set up a meeting. I guess the only thing I can tell you is that when we look at what has changed, we're looking at recommendations for spend and probably not revenue, because the revenue estimates, as Debbie and Tracy and Bob go through them, they're really just looking at history or their factors and all that, so.
Every year when I submit the budget, I put comments and notes, and I reference these statutes, and they are ignored.
So we're talking, just so we're clear here, are we talking about a $30,000 discrepancy? Is that about where your thoughts are on this?
Well, on that one, there's 30,000, but really the whole 52,000 doesn't belong there.
So what attorney out of staff represents the collector's office? Do you have is it Drew or?
No, it is Bob Hoink.
Okay.
And what would those reserves be?
And actually, this is also addressed in the auditor's report that has not been issued yet because they're waiting on the administration's response.
The auditor's report says that this is, that what you're saying is?
Yes, it talks about the collector's fund is not to be used to supplant. Just as it talks about the county shall provide the same amount of revenues plus whatever percentage increase to the personnel in that office.
Isn't that's our auditor?
That's us.
Yeah, why isn't we got the report?
He's here, administration.
He's waiting
No,
on my.
he's waiting on.
He's waiting on my responses.
How much is that reserve fund about? She said we're spending down our reserves.
The
tax maintenance
surplus,
fund
the
reserve.
surplus at the end of 17 was $541,000. The estimated reserve at the end of 2018 is $421,000. That's an estimate. It's based on, if it's
So
based on
reserves are
conservative
probably your
estimates.
operation, so there should be plenty of reserve there.
Yeah, but you can't just dwindle it down. I mean,
Unless they're dwindling down, you still got a year's worth of reserve.
Can I ask Brent? He's over there. Brent, can I ask you a question? Sure. You want to come up here real quick?
He's in the middle of an audit right now.
He's done with it. You're done with this audit, right?
He's waiting on my responses.
So I can ask you questions, right? I mean, yeah. So what's your, on this, what she's referring to, this 22,000 versus this 52,000, what is in your response to that? What did you put in your notes?
On the tax maintenance fund, I'd have to look at, refresh myself. I believe on that one was, I think we recommended the balance, there's a certain balance that we do not take from the tax maintenance fund to give it back to the general revenue fund.
Right.
So we do not get in the aspect of the cost allocation plan now.
Okay, so, okay, I guess that's something we need to look at then. We'll just, is that, yeah, we got to look at that. I mean, well, we can have a sidebar conversation on that and see where, just, yeah, get that straightened out.
Bob, do you know when your responses will get back to Brent?
Well, now that the budget is winding down, yes, I'll have them done in the next week or two.
Okay.
But I haven't been catching
We
up
can
with
have,
a lot of things.
if we have to, Bob, if we have a different of opinion, but we, try to come to, we can get with them like we did with Rich a couple of years ago, just kind of figure it out, if that's needed, I don't know. But if she's right, if it's the law, it's the law. I mean, that's just, but if there's a difference in opinion, we'll try to figure it out.
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, this says that the county shall maintain, furnish, equip said offices, and provide them with the necessary stationery supplies, equipment, appliances, furniture, and all be taken care of and paid out of the county treasurer of said county at the time and in the manner that the county commission may direct. So that to me leaves a lot open for that we decide, not so much
Well, I mean, it's not, like, again,
collector decides.
this is probably one of the easiest budgets we've ever had, because it's not that big of money.
Right.
I mean,
And the point of coming to address you tonight is not the explicit numbers on here. We can live with this. It is, again, to try and open conversations because things are coming to you that we should have an opportunity to discuss with them. And hopefully, you're not going to take the attitude that I heard expressed last year during a budget session with the recorder, well, and anybody can review the tapes. Basically, someone said, if you're not going to do this for us, then we'll just take all your stuff from you. I don't want that. I'm here to say, let's keep dialogues open and let's try and work together on this. And if the only opportunity I get to do that is coming here, because when I send an email, which is the way I got the request, and said, yes, I'd like to talk to you if you're going to change anything, and I get no response, my only opportunity to address that is to come back here.
I appreciate where you're at. I would ask that we move forward, because with all due respect, we're here to talk about the budget. You're good with the budget. You're upset of how they communicate with you. That's an issue between you and the administration, to be completely frank, not between you and the council. So if you're good with the numbers, God love you, it's 623. So
Let's let you get on with your meeting.
thank you.
However, though, I mean, I'm still going to ask.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, what he's talking about, what she's talking about, because you got to get to the bottom of the facts.
Sure.
But it's
Until
not,
we
like
get
you said,
those
it's not a big
responses,
deal.
we're not going to do that. And in the interest of time, I kind of like to move on. We have other people that we need to talk to. So,
However, to remind you, the purpose of budget is going through this stuff and not rushing through it.
and I
Okay,
think
so
she
if we-
said she's good with the numbers. So
But
we're going through a
but she
budget.
felt
But, I mean, there are
necessary
even
to come up
typos in
here.
it, from what I submitted to what it says I submitted. So those are the types of things that I feel are unfair. I mean, they're not hugely material, but at the same time, if somebody put what you submitted incorrectly somewhere else, I think you would want it to be right.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, information systems.
Speaking of which, welcome.
Thank you.
So on information systems, we asked Simon before, he talked a little bit about the positions that he had asked for and that we funded, to give you a little bit of update from when he last presented to you in March of 18. Do you mind doing that real quick?
Sure, I can do that. So on the slide that says spending update, it shows between green and orange. The orange was the amounts we had spent in March, the orange bars. And then the green ones and the percentages are what we have spent year to date. So as you can see, for most of these expenditures, we've spent 100% of what you had approved at that time. There are a couple of them that we did not have to spend for. There was a consultant for engineering that we did not hire. But the two big ones are the Microsoft Cloud, which we are still behind on that project. And so the expenditure is only 10% of the 2-year spend. And SSI, which was a 3-year spend, and we are on track for that. So that's about 1/3 of what we expected to spend over 3 years. So I think the last time the question was, council had approved a whole bunch of funds. What were we doing for the funds? How fast were we spending them? And the intent of the graph was to show that some of these expenditures are over multiple years. And we're tracking fine on one of them and behind one on the cloud. Okay with that? Make sense?
What seems to be the biggest problem with this, with the cloud?
So it's basically time to spend on that project. We were severely constrained by having only one architect at that time.
So why don't you go ahead and jump them forward to the next slide and get that back to right in there.
Oh, sorry. So there's a slide that talks about the migration update. So the last time I'd spoken to you, I had set a target of getting done by March of 2019. In that time, we've actually got ExpressRoute done, which is the connection into the cloud. But most of 2018 was consumed by efforts around the Emergency Operations Center. And if you remember, that we were constrained by having one technical architect. we had opened up another position to hire a second one. The candidate that we identified didn't work out, so we were without a candidate or without an employee for about half the year. And we did refill it in the latter half of the year. But that's, so having people to work on the project and then working on higher priority projects was the one that was holding it back. So what we did at the end of the year to make sure we make some progress on it is to use outside resources. And in October, we engaged a vendor to help us move forward with the project and signed a small contract with them to do a pilot migration to validate that this works. And if it does work, my recommendation is we use an external resource just to complete the rest of the migration. Because the amount of demand for IT services is constant and never ending. And to think that something is going to change in the next year that hasn't changed over the last 4 or 5 years is just hoping. I skipped a slide about update on projects. I can go into any detail on that you want.
I think
Yes.
Councilman Cronin has a question.
No offense to you, but most of what you said is Greek to me.
Okay.
I'm an old guy. They teach us stuff in school when I was in school.
Okay.
I did read your presentation this afternoon.
Okay.
And I understand you're meeting the goals and objectives you want to. But, you know, I know numbers pretty well, and I'm looking at the total capital outlay for IT, or IS rather, for both in capital outlay and total expenditures. And it's been historically, like in 16 and 17, there's about $3 million. For 18, it's estimated $3.5 million. And now we're jumping to $4.8 million, so $1.3 million more money we're requesting for next year. So I thought the whole idea of the switching to the cloud was try to save money. It looks to me like we're going to spend $1.3 million more next year than what we did last year. And what's the justification for that? Why are we spending $1.3 million? That might be a question you and Bob have to answer together.
And when we first talked about the cloud, sometime in 2016, 17, when we were showing you what the cost comparisons would be between on-premise and the cloud, it wasn't so much cost savings justification for moving to the cloud. It was a scalability and agility justification, right? You remember when, because of our processes in terms of bidding for the hardware and buying hardware and taking time to stand it up in our data centers and building bigger data centers so we could put all these things in, that was slowing us down. And if there were people like a Microsoft or a Google or Amazon who could do that in their cloud, we could just consume services from them as opposed to trying and standing up our own equipment. So it wasn't so much a big cost savings by going to the cloud. It was almost cost neutral or even slightly more expensive to go to the cloud. But what it was going to give us was speed and agility, speed and scalability. So if we needed to double the size of our infrastructure, we could over a day, basically, right? You just turn up more services in the cloud. You buy more services in the cloud.
So is the $1.4 million a 30% increase in what you're requesting for the budget? Is that because we need it or because we didn't spend money in the years past, or why is it that much more money?
A lot of that spend is actually to catch up on all these projects we've been ignoring for the past few years, what we call technical debt. When you don't take care of your hardware over time, then it suddenly becomes an urgent issue to try and resolve all these end-of-life devices. So we budget for them in previous years, but we never get to do those projects. So on the slide that says updates on projects, there's a whole yellow section down here where projects we had budgeted to do in 2018 that we never got to. So we're basically rolling all these numbers into the following year.
So kind of like the oil filter commercial, pay me now or pay me later?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
You pay it, we're paying a little more later because we didn't do this in the past.
Correct.
Okay.
If you could go to the next slide, please, Jim. One more. This slide is just an example of the other work that's going on within the department. And on the bottom right, we continue to have challenges around talent and hiring. The last time I'd spoken to you, we were about 20% turnover in the department every year, year over year, and that's proved true this year also. So there's a lot of time, and thanks to our partners in HR, posting positions, sourcing candidates, interviewing candidates, and unfortunately some of them don't work out. Next slide, please. Again, this is meant to demonstrate some of the other work that consumes time. There's a lot of contracts that we have to review, a lot of quotes and requisitions that we have to issue for all the technology needs of the county. And on the next slide, we talk about the personnel requests that we've asked for in the budget. And instead of reading through this, I'll wait for questions if you have questions.
What seems to be the biggest problem with turnover?
Personnel. Now we're hiding.
Biggest problem with turnover is probably the sheer demand on that department. It's a very stressful place to work because every department either trying to meet citizen needs for information or to make things easier for the citizens using various county services or trying to streamline services is making a demand on that department. So it's just a constant merry-go-round for them as we try to catch up with modernizing.
And if I can add to that, we're a great training ground. So our salaries historically are, we're much more competitive now than we were 5 years ago. They're still fairly low, so we get a lot of folks who are younger, who get a great skill set in county government, learn some really great tools, and are very valuable to somebody else out in the private sector, and we lose them to usually career trajectory. We just had a staff member leave us about 3 weeks ago who joined us fairly early, right out of college, and our GIS team did a great job for us, very, very valuable employee, but doesn't have a lot of career path trajectory in our small GIS department, and found an opportunity with a private firm who paid him to go learn and do some other things he couldn't do with us. So we're a great training ground for other opportunities unless we can really compete on salary and work lifestyle type stuff.
So Joanne, I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Jennifer was just saying, does it make sense then to outsource more of these things? If we're spending time, and you've referenced how much time you're spending recruiting and interviewing, and then you got the initial train up, and I maintain that most employees aren't very valuable for the first 6 months or so, and then we're losing them a short time later. Does it start making sense to outsource even more of these, and or is it even possible to hire a company to do it for us rather than being the training ground as Jennifer just alluded to?
Sure. So two parts to the answer. One is, if you remember, we engaged with a managed service provider last year. It's called SSI out of Philadelphia. That was a 3-year contract I tried to show you on the graphs. We're spending close to 500 and something thousand with them every year. So they're supposed to provide the hands and the eyes to monitor all this equipment and offload some of the work for us. The other thing we've been doing, with a lot of help from legal and the executive offices, engaging vendors to help us do work. So you'll see more contract requests from IS so that we can go source the talent, the specific expertise we need to run a particular project. And we've had a few successes with them this year. We completed an Active Directory project. with the EOC, we had to depend on other vendors to do that. So I think both of those are valid options.
One of the things that Joe keeps talking about over here in my other ear is we're not seeing a decrease in personnel costs. So I guess in my simplistic way of looking at things, if we were contracting more out, it seems like then if we're shifting the money outside, why aren't we seeing more decreases to the personnel lines?
I think we did see some decrease with the SSI issue. This year, there's more just because we are asking for more people, right? And we also, like Jennifer mentioned, we're also trying to do a little bit with the salaries to stay somewhat competitive with the private sector. I know we're not ever going to be on par with them, but we also have to try and adjust the salaries a little bit to give people a shot at working in IT for county government.
Okay.
And you're not going to see a decrease in the number of staff as we have more and more departments wanting to implement more and more technology. It just, the amount of volume of new stuff that we are stuff that we have to constantly replace because it's dead and old in 5 years is significant. So you'll see when you walk through the personnel request that some of these application analysts are being added because we just built a new EOC and it's coming along with
Speaking for
software
myself, and I think
packages.
some of the other gentlemen here, it's difficult for us to get our heads wrapped around IS things because a lot of it becomes, it's kind of like buying a new car. Yes, there's newer, fancier gizmos that are on the car. Do you really need them or not? Or will the 5-year-old car still get you back and forth to work, even though it doesn't have the largest display screen or cameras that look backward, sideways, and up. Those are all neat features, but they cost more. And are we really getting the benefit for spending more on those as compared to the 5 or 10-year-old? I drive a 10-year-old truck, so my 10-year-old truck gets me back and forth to here just fine.
We are not buying the tricked out Escalade.
Right.
Okay?
That's what's hard for us to really get our heads wrapped around.
Yeah.
Can I? Is this? Okay, what they're talking about, some of the things like the stuff we have, like the technology we have, like in our cars, our computers we use, some of the systems they have in them, they're just stopping them. They're phasing them out. You have no choice. Like the tasers, our tasers have computers in them. They just stop making that brand or that model. It just stops. So I mean, corrections, us, the sheriff, we're all kind of in the same boat. So it's not necessarily I want the newest, coolest one with the moonroof or whatever. They're just, as they're changing technology, they're catching up, and they just shut off what you have. So you have no.
Just use a baton instead. Did they change the technology on those?
No, he's gonna sit down.
I have no comment.
Before you ask a question, can I move? Because he may want to use a baton again.
So I don't want to go that direction.
It does to some
On
degree, yes.
page 40, where's the 500,000 annual payment that we were talking about?
Just fine.
That's the SSI.
It's in professional services. Under the first line under operating.
What line?
Under operating, the first line is 43,200.
Okay, so what I'm talking about with these guys is we've had several years ago, we talked about, we let go a lot of people in the IS department because we were going to sub it out to this SSI company and save a bunch of money and reduce the amount of staff, but we're not reduced it at all. Now we were at 30 in 2016, now we're going to be at 31, and I think that's, I don't understand this stuff, to be honest with you. I really don't. But I do, like Joe, I look at the numbers and the conversations we had in the past. Sure. So I think if, in fact, what Dave's talking about is, well, you got this much more information technology that's needed, then we probably should have a list of what the output was in 2016 and what it is now and why you need all this additional staff, because in reality we haven't really saved anything. I mean, it doesn't seem to be better. It seems to be just as dysfunctional it was several years ago. Maybe it's not. I don't know, but it just seems like, and I remember Joanne, we asked for several years ago, can we have an outline, like a 5-year plan on what the expectations are? And we talked about it, but I don't know unless it could just be me, honestly, it could be. But I don't know if we have seen a 5-year plan with a roadmap on exactly where we're going, what our goals are, and what we're going to do. Because it just seems like the expenditures keep getting bigger and bigger, and there's always a lot of problems. And so that's just how I see it from afar. And so I think that the council, this is a big spend and a big increase. It'd be nice to kind of know exactly why and where the money's going and what our next plan is. What is our 5-year plan from here to 2023? And that way we'd have a plan or a roadmap. Otherwise, we're just, okay, next year, let's see what happens. I mean, I don't know. That's how I see it.
Well, I don't think it's next year what I see. Can I just correct one thing that you said?
Absolutely.
The move to SSI was never about saving money. It was because we couldn't buy the personnel that we needed on the market. We never said it was going to be cheaper to do that. We could not literally hire the number of experienced IT architects and engineers that we need.
And they covered that with us.
No, I know, but I mean, you know, there was a lot of moving parts.
It was just one thing you said, that you said we were
Yeah.
going to save money by doing that. It wasn't about saving money, it was about personnel. Now, what you said is, and you're right, we haven't given it to you strictly as a 5-year plan. We've been, and we can try to fit it into a 5-year plan, but what we've been doing is trying to talk about, which this next set of slides get into, what are we trying to cover? So, you know, each of the departments almost has various things that they're either trying to serve the electorate with, or they're trying to do better record keeping with. So, for instance, both the Department of Health and the Department of Corrections kept all their medical records by hand. So if somebody came in and they needed, for instance, in the jail, somebody who's been there before, they had to literally go back and hand search that the file wasn't in the wrong place. And they do great record keeping. I don't want to say that, but you know, when you're keeping paper, you can always potentially have a mistake. And so they're trying to convert that into electronic.
So how many
That takes somebody to do it.
Right, I get that. So how many other departments are in the next couple of years are going to come up that don't have, that's got paper files, and we got to, I mean, so that's what I'm talking about. This should be forecasted, right?
The technology's always changing, so.
No, but there should be a plan. What are you going to just come up with a new plan every year?
Are you good
Trying to
with?
guess what they're gonna have. Go ahead.
Sorry. Are you and Bob good with the 30% increase, $1 million+ dollars?
It doesn't matter if they're good with it, Joe. We're the ones that are elected, for
They did
God's
the
sake.
analysis, we didn't. I'm asking a valid question. I mean, you've looked at, you know the departments that needs, for instance, like Dave Todd's needs and all the departments. Do you think this is something we need to do?
We have looked at this and we support what this request is. It is not as much as he asked. We supported it around the exact things that you'll see up there as personnel requests and as hardware needs. And we can go through those in as much depth as you want so that you can ask all the questions that you want. I also understand why you're asking, Joe, and we can try to fit that. But let me just give you one caveat to why this is a little bit different of a 5-year plan than anybody else's would be. As Joe alluded to, the technology's changing. So Simon and I have had this conversation, probably a dozen times over the last 18 months to 2 years, which is he has to keep the lights on. So the basic computer systems have to run, the email has to work, he's got to keep the licenses and all the software updates that come out regularly, monthly, that he's been getting done. He also has to plan for the big projects, which we used to have the departments involved on a regular quarterly basis involved with that. In addition to that, we have what I call the flow of business and what Simon has hired a psychiatrist to help him with, which is things change in government every year. Highway moved out of the admin building into the building across the street so that we could get the sheriff as close to the courthouse as we could. And because of that, he had to pull a certain number of people for a couple of months to get the connections done over there to do that. The police department renovated and so had to have data ports and things. He had to stop what they were doing to do things around that. The list goes on and on and on, and that's part of the stress that they have. We can't back off entirely of doing what business requires us to do. We know our cameras all around the county need an upgrade. I've got the county counselor's office screaming at me because they want them fixed in corrections immediately, But we're about to do a feasibility study. If I'm tearing down walls and corrections, I don't want to go out and spend $300,000 fixing his camera connections this year when it's all going to get redone next year anyway. So there is that piece of his 5-year plan that is much more exaggerated in terms of the things that will change on him, that we can't stop. He would love it if I would tell him, you don't have to do anything but your 5-year plan for the next 5 years. He's actually begged that a couple of times, and he knows that's not going anywhere, because not only does he have to keep the lights on and do the big projects, he's got to do the stuff that comes up. That's the only caveat that I have.
Mr. Chairman, I don't understand all the technology, and I have a hard time understanding some of the planning. But just to add to what's been said, I mean, it seems like once a month I get a press release from Barry talking about some new service that we're offering on the internet. And my guess is most of those we didn't exist 5 years ago. Now, you know, if you want us to go ahead and do a moratorium on new technology, that's your prerogative. I would hope that you wouldn't. But, you know, I think around here we tend to be proud of some of the cutting edge stuff that we're doing. And I guess the bottom line is it's not free. Cost us money, and the 911, and you could probably give us a whole list of things. It seemed like the last 3 or 4 months we've just been on fire. So this is how you pay for it, I guess.
My point, this is the world that we live in. The world that we live in is everyone is asking for more information. Every department of county government wants more and more of your time and your department's time. And for us, I think our thing is, you know, we're just looking at the cost, but I don't know if you could spend 12 hours explaining everything to us and we would really understand it a whole lot more than we do now, other than, you know, the numbers. So I think we really, in a lot of respect, we just have to trust you folks that this is really needed and this is the direction that we have to go.
So
it's difficult doing that.
If I could just give you guys some sort of baseline or benchmark. There's another county in Missouri that has twice the number of employees that we have, right? And they had tripled the operating budget and tripled the number of employees. They have 90-something employees in the IT department for double the size of the employees, right? Also, we measure ourselves against industry, and Gartner is a consultancy that studies across different industries, government, manufacturing, and they come up with metrics about what are the ratios that you should have for an IT organization for the type of organization. So when you look at state and local government, which is one of the verticals, there's 3 metrics they look at. Number of IT employees as a percentage of total number of employees, and we are about 2.9% the IT employee base compared to the overall employee base. Their ratio is about 4.5% on that metric. There's another metric they look at in terms of how much does the organization spend per employee, right? The IT spend, if you take all the IT spend and divide it by the number of employees, how much is each of the, what is the individual spend by employee? And their metric is about 9,200 and we're about 4,600 approximately. The only one that we're even is they look at IT operating budget as a percentage of overall organization operating budget, and we are about even over there, about 5.2%. Right? So even compared to industry benchmarks and some anecdotal evidence, our costs are not way out of line for other IT organizations in county government or compared to state and local government.
Okay, any other questions?
Do you want us to do facilities?
We got it, right?
I don't know that I have a whole lot of...
Dave, do you want us to do, the county executive's asking, do you want us to do police since we have all their people here?
Sure.
Can you roll through police quickly?
Yes, sir, I can.
Let's go. Just don't go to the top. I'm the closest guy, I don't know.
I'm pretty accurate.
Yeah.
First of all, before we address this, I just want to pass on regarding Director Keene. Since he's taken over as far as the chiefs go, I don't speak for the sheriff, he speaks for himself. It's the best relationship we've had in years with the Department of Corrections.
That's good to hear.
So, good evening, gentlemen. Like others, we're coming in to fight our battle. Our first individual we want to discuss is I believe it's the laboratory.
Yeah, I think that the way that you set this up from the slides that came in, so a lot of this is concentrated, all but one position in the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, which is Captain Tiefenbrun's bureau. So right now he has the General Detective Bureau, the Cybercrime Task Force, Forensic Services, and the Crime Lab under him. And part of his ask was for a detective, and part of it was for a forensic investigator. And so the first thing up on the second page, you'll see it says currently there are 10 detectives who work the property and crimes against persons. And he's got 2 sergeants of the Bureau who also work cases. They're not just supervisors. And he's very tied up in fraud investigations. And so you'll see on the third slide, it talks about he's got a 15% uptick in the last year alone and how intensive they are. And since the chief called you forward, I'll leave it to you at that point to...
Because you can ask me questions, some I'll just direct to Dave, but what we're looking for is a detective to help handle the fraud cases. We're going to start getting buried here soon, what everybody's familiar with. We're going to especially start getting the income tax scams, the identity theft. We're going to get buried in those here soon. And we've had one detective, he's a general assignment detective, but he's become a specialist in the fraud. And he's been pulled in almost all the time. He's handling fraud cases, but he's still trying to maintain his other caseload. We're also getting out, because he's so good at this, we're also getting outreach from other agencies asking for our help. We farm a lot of our help out, and you'll see that in all the requests. Because we're the county, and rightly so, a lot of the other agencies are coming seeking assistance from us, our expertise and our assistance. And we reach back and give back from what we give. So when we talk to the cities, oh my God, we're paying county taxes. Well, this is some of the services they're getting back from the county. So I'll let Captain Tiefenbrun address the fraud detective.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any specific questions you have, but the caseload this detective has is heavier than any other caseload by all the other detectives, and it's probably the most manpower intensive. I mean, it's very manpower intensive because of subpoenas and getting all these documents from different banks, credit card companies, where these fraud take place. You got to contact those businesses. A lot of times they're reluctant to release that information to us, so they have to get more subpoenas. So it is very, very intensive as far as paperwork to investigate these and get other agencies involved depending on where the investigation leads to. Some of them lead out of the country, so you're getting the feds involved in that. Some of them are through the Postal Service, so you're getting the U.S. Postal Authority involved. So there's very time consuming, and it's a lot of legwork and a lot of tracking.
How many you asked for, Dave? 1?
Correct.
Is that going to be enough?
Well, he asked
I think you've asked me that before. No, it's not.
The chief asked for more people than we gave him. I mean, you asked me that before at another meeting, and I told you that. They asked for 7, and we gave them 3.
But
can we talk about the park department thing, or is that still not out?
No, the Rangers have been, they were.
All right, so when you say 3, that doesn't count the 5?
It does not.
The 5.
Okay.
When we were looking, she was talking about, okay, when we sat down, okay, what are critical bodies that you need? And we're talking about the 3 critical bodies that I'm here for tonight is because it's not just, we're not servicing the unincorporated areas of the county with these personnel. We also service the cities, and we're starting to reach out, others are reaching out to us for the assistance. Just for example, the fraud detective, go ahead.
No, Dave, I get it. I'm good for that. I was just wondering if he's got enough help. And I know the computer crimes guy, is he going to need help too, or do we have him covered, or what?
Yeah, right now we're covered with the other individual we're looking for is another lab scientist. Besides, Captain Tiefenbrun was talking just about the detective. Another body we're looking for is another lab scientist, because we're neck deep in alligators. We're now getting stuff from the feds and the state. Yes, sir?
I understand that you want to provide lab services to the cities of this county, and that's right.
We do, sir.
when you do it for the ATF or the DA, FBI, do you get any money back from the feds for that?
I can't speak to that, because if any funds would come back, we wouldn't see them, they would go to.
Do we, Joanne, or we're doing
We
our
don't
job?
charge the ambulance,
No, we don't. The FBI helps with some overtime money to clear DNA cases in the lab. Basically, they just pay that overtime. They don't actually subsidize the lab itself.
But helping those guys is probably helping, even if we don't get paid for it, it's helping him put away bad guys, right?
Oh, sure. I mean,
It all works out, we all help each other at the end of the day, because they're providing service to us, and go ahead, Joe.
No, I get all that, but so if we got them 2 guys, is that a far reach or what, Joanne? I mean.
It's helping us put out.
I mean, I think it'd be
Well,
great.
no, because fraud is it's a bad.
It'd be great though. Where are we gonna get the additional revenue sources?
Everybody, Joe, and I appreciate, everybody's coming in here with needs, and we're not the only ones. What I'm coming in here asking for tonight, and we sat down, and we all got together in our bureau, as does the sheriff and correction and everything else. What is the critical? And my critical are these 3 individuals. Another range officer, because we're running the range night and day, and trying to cut back on my overtime. Another lab scientist, because our lab is just getting swamped, which is great, because that's what it's there for. And the fraud detector. Those are my critical bodies. Everything else we're working as we do other budgets and move on, but these are the critical bodies that I'm hurting for now, that I'm seeking.
Let me jump in here, because I had my identity stolen, and I went down to the sheriff's department, and they had one detective that was covering all the fraud cases, and I was pretty disappointed.
That's what I'm saying.
Not only as a citizen.
It's still the same detective.
But also as a councilman, because
I think that's important, man. I mean,
you know,
fraud's a big thing.
I didn't feel good about it at all. What happened,
well, if there's,
So-
I mean, that's one thing we can look at. I mean, I could look at it. I mean, I'd like to have.
So not only this year.
Dave, next time ask for 4.
He did.
I said not only one this year, but I think we need to look at another detective for the fraud division next year.
And we are, but in fairness, it's like, okay, give us your critical. I need another fraud detective, but I also need a lab scientist. Because our lab work is just getting tremendous, and the ladies and gentlemen, they're working night and day. Again, this was a critical, not, oh gosh, this would be awesome, but I gotta, we gotta put the fires out as we move along. There's only so much money, and I get that. So we're trying to be team players, so we're asking for our critical needs of these 3 individuals.
Okay.
Is there anything else besides, not you, Dave, but is there anybody else that's got any critical request, or is that it, Chief?
You talking about inside the PD?
Yeah.
Brian Hampton, we're asking for another the lab scientist.
Oh, you already went over that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the other one's the range officer, because the range is running night and day, and that's Captain Ostermeyer. But you've got it there in front of you, and I know we got a council, so.
But that's all in the budget, Joanne?
Yes, sir.
it is.
Okay.
It is. We asked the chief, give us what you have to have. I mean, there's always things that the police department, corrections, I mean, for each of them, we didn't give them everything they asked for.
No, I get it.
Trying to spread it around where we thought we had to have it.
And I know IS just took a lot of heat. They bend over backwards. They've been over backwards. And you don't see it where you're at. And they're like us sometimes. They're running to put out fires. And
we understand that. At least I do.
As our county's growing, and we're talking here about money, and tonight I just had a complaint from a gentleman that was on a board of, his community board, and they're having trouble with break-ins, the cars during the night. We're talking about these computer things, but it's simple things that's coming to our county that we're going to have to address. And our citizens are going to have to realize that if they want protection, there's going to have to be some mechanism to pay for it. So sometime in the near future, we're going to have to find a funding mechanism that'll support our citizens and protect them. So I think within the next couple of years, we're going to have to seriously look at that. Because the budget that we have now, we can't really provide everything that our citizens are going to need.
No, I agree.
well, you haven't even had the sheriff yet. We're all in the same boat.
Dave, did you guys are you partnering with St. Charles City on the problems down on the riverfront? Because I heard you guys had county PD down on Wednesday night. Unless there was some kind of a an arrest or something.
If they ask for our help, we'll provide help to anybody. So I don't know if we were there, Joe, but if anybody asks for help, we provide the help.
All right,
Hey,
gentlemen.
Steve, are there any conversations on that yet? Me and Steve was razzing a councilman, getting you guys to go down there.
Anybody call?
No, that was Wednesday night, County PD was down there, I had a couple calls, but they asked if we started that program, but I said not that I'm gonna know of.
Do you need my keys?
Break it down
Dan,
after the meeting.
do you need my